Brooklyn Independent Television.
And thank you everybody for being here, and thank you. Is this working? Is it working? No? Okay, that's pretty close. I'm just going to read the first few pages from a story from my book, which was actually the last story that I wrote for the book, and since then I've been working on a novel, so it was actually the last story I wrote. And it did occur to me, because you all have a copy of it, that we could all read it out loud together and have a sort of flash reading, but I think I'll just do it. So the story is called A Country Where You Once Lived. It isn't even a 2-hour train ride out from London to the village where Jeremy's daughter and her husband, a man Jeremy has never met, have lived for the past 3 years. But it's one of those trips that seems to carry you much farther than the time might imply. By around the halfway point, the scenery has shaken off all evidence of the city, all evidence, really, of the past century or two. Or so it seems to Jeremy, as long as he blurs his eyes to the occasional black line of motorway snaking through it all, to the dots of color speeding along the line. Otherwise, it's pretty much all mild shades of green and milling cows, sheep clustered at copses, church steeples appearing at regular intervals in a gentle, reassuring rhythm. It's a fantasy landscape, he thinks, the kind that encourages belief in the myth of uncomplicated lives. Jeremy is riding backwards, so is watching it all recede, and the sensation is oddly saddening, or maybe not so oddly saddening. A scientist, a cancer researcher, he passes his days in the flux and flow between the minute facts of molecular composition and our comparatively clunky selves. He knows well that for all the brain's cellular elegance, it has too this kind of simple, simplistic aspect to it. Leaving is sad. Even just the illusion of leaving is sad. As each view recedes, his eyes are tricked and in turn trick his brain. He is leaving, leaving, leaving. Of course he feels sad. That's what he tells himself anyway as he rides along, that his settling melancholy is at least in part the mechanical product of a cause and effect process of sensory input and reflexive response. Maybe it will wear off as the day goes on, he tells himself. The reason Jeremy Piper has never met his son-in-law is that he hasn't seen his daughter Zoe in just over 4 years. The reason he hasn't seen his daughter in all that time is a bit harder to determine, some lethal blend of ancient angers and the seductive ease of separation 3,000 miles granted them 13 years earlier. In those early days back in Boston by himself, Jeremy was capable of working himself into a strangely personal anger at the Atlantic Ocean, as though it were some kind of bully standing between him and his family, as though he were overmatched. But increasingly he's aware of how much blame belongs to him. The fulcrum of his life, the fateful before and after line, was the year they all spent in London, starting June 1996. Our very own annus horribilis, his wife called it at the time. They went to England, he, Kathleen, and Zoe, so he could begin the work for which he has since garnered much acclaim, a study of the potential cancer-fighting properties of an enzyme found in a particularly deadly mushroom growing only in Britain, or, as Kathleen began saying some months in, on the potential cancer-fighting properties of an enzyme found in blah, blah, blah. Neither Kathleen nor Zoe, 16 at the time, wanted to make the move until Jeremy won Kathleen over with the argument that taking Zoe away from her thoroughly dislikable, probably criminal friends could only be a good idea. But then Just about 1 month into the stay, Zoe ran away from home with a Boston boy, a school friend backpacking the Lake District over his summer break. And she didn't just run away. She left no word about where she had gone, no sign that she had gone under her own steam. Jeremy could only ever remember bits and moments from those 2 weeks, the ones when she was gone. Merciful amnesia, a friend called it, except it wasn't very merciful, because only the worst of it stuck with him, or so he assumed. Like the first shock at her absence, as too many hours passed for it to be benign teenage tardiness. Like walking the streets of London night after night, as though she might have become a nocturnal creature waiting to reveal herself in the dark. Like the dawning, nightmarish realization that he himself was a suspect in her disappearance. We're not making any accusations. You wouldn't want us to leave any stone unturned. He imagined himself on trial, wrongly convicted, locked away, the headlines clever if obvious plays on his name. Tried, Piper lured own daughter. That was a uniquely vivid memory. But still, there were long stretches from those days during which, for all he could ever remember, he might as well have been dead. That wasn't true of what followed her return. The difficulty was never remembering that period, but letting it go. Particularly his own trouble accepting that she hadn't been abducted, she had left of her own free will, and that she hadn't been unable to contact them, she had chosen not to. His own disbelief at the disappearance of the villain he had conjured and blamed for it all, the man who had been the target of his rage while she was gone, the object of revenge fantasies so violent and so vile, Jeremy had barely admitted them to himself. The man who had doubtless killed his daughter, doubtless done God knew what else to her, and in the process, minor collateral damage, Jeremy understood, destroyed her father. Except there was no man. There was only his Zoe, 16 years old, and sorry, really, really sorry for what she had done. Or so she said. At home, he would watch her. He would study his daughter the way he studied the animals in his lab, as though doing so might provide some kind of solution. She had returned rail thin, all eyes and bone. Her honey hair was jet black. Her lips were perpetually chapped, as though she'd been drained of some essential human moisture. She looked like a wraith, otherworldly, but she did normal things. That was what kept him mesmerized. The way she sat at the kitchen table eating yogurt. The fact that she spoke on the phone, that she listened to music, that she walked through the doorways of their elegant rented townhouse without falling to her knees at every threshold to reflect on what she had done. For reasons he never understood, Kathleen had escaped official suspicion, and she had also resisted the idea that there was a villain to the piece, so she hadn't learned to hate as elaborately as he. That was his theory anyway, the foundation on which he built his resentment, that it had all been much easier for her. So he envied her, and he was angry at her, and about 6 weeks after Zoe's return, Jeremy embarked on a standard-issue, utterly predictable affair with a colleague at the lab, despite the fact that he didn't really like the woman very much. Liking her or not liking her seemed oddly irrelevant to the decision to have sex with her a few times a week. The truth was, he wasn't a bit sure he would ever like anyone again. He seemed to have lost the thread of how affections worked. Ultimately, though, the small satisfaction of doing something behind Kathleen's back lost out to the impulse to hurt her, so one night toward the end of the year, motivated more by spite than by anything like remorse, he confessed. She looked momentarily confused, shock at his disclosure, he assumed, then confessed her own affair right back at him. Under different circumstances, that might have signaled a chance to start over, one betrayal canceling out the other, the slate wiped clean. But as it went, they were like the dueling pair that shoots simultaneously, so both end up dead. There were never any fights after that, not even much open acrimony, just an overwhelming atmosphere of defeat in the house. With all the predictable unkindness of irony, as the family broke apart, it turned out that Kathleen and Zoe had both grown to feel at home in England, and they decided to stay on. It was while driving Jeremy to Heathrow for his miserable solo flight back to the States that Kathleen borrowed the Queen's phrase. "Our very own annus horribilis," she said. "I feel positively royal." It's Kathleen, unmistakably Kathleen, waving from the platform of the Thomas the Tank Engine station when Jeremy's train comes to its stop. "Hello, you," she calls out as he steps down. He wasn't expecting her there. He waves, a small waist-level gesture, one arm pulling a bag, the other weighted with his computer. "Hello, you," he echoes, too quietly to be heard. He's a bit numb as he walks toward her. It's been fully 5 years. He used to see her quite often at family events when she would jet over, sometimes with Zoe, sometimes alone, moving across the ocean with an ease he never thought about too clearly when cursing the Atlantic's role in his life. Over time, they progressed from avoiding each other at those events to seeking each other out as people with whom they could at least be themselves. They even once drunkenly stumbled into a sexual encounter that they tacitly agreed neither to repeat nor ever mention again. And the next few times they saw each other after that, he noticed they'd adopted an oddly jocular, teasing style of conversation that reminded Jeremy of the way his brother, Jonathan, and his old high school football teammates spoke to one another in middle age. But that was all years ago, as ancient in its way as their wedded days. "I wasn't expecting you," he says as they embrace. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Well," she says it with a slight shrug, as though to convey that it should be obvious why Zoe thought her presence necessary. "I hope it's at least an okay surprise. Can I help you carry anything?" "It is. No, I'm fine." He's startled by how entirely known she is to him. Not just familiar or even evocative, but inevitable in some way, as though she were the mama duck and he the little one on whom she long ago imprinted her heart-shaped face and her dark blue eyes, the straight lines of her posture, the angle at which she held her head, a certain sighing sound she would make before she spoke. As they walk toward a small lot filled with cars, he feels her settle over him like a climate in which he used to live. Stop
there. I'm going to read a story called Lion and Panther in London, and it's actually based on two real-life wrestlers. They were from the state of Punjab. And in the early 1900s, they were these, monster champions, sort of the precursor to WWF in India. So in 1910, they decided to go to London because they wanted to compete for a world title. And you had to go to London to win a world championship title. And so when I was kind of thinking about this story, I came across this playbill announcing their arrival. So the story starts with that playbill. The sensation of the wrestling world, exclusive engagement of India's catch-as-catch-can champions, genuine challengers of the universe, all corners, any nationality, no one barred. Gama, champion, undefeated wrestler of India, winner of over 200 legitimate matches. Imam, his brother, champion of Lahore. These wrestlers are both British subjects. Gama, the Lion of the Punjab, will attempt to throw any 3 men without restriction as to weight in 30 minutes any night during this engagement, and competitors are asked to present themselves either publicly or through the management. No one barred, all champions cordially invited, the bigger, the better. Gama the Great is bored. Imam translates the newspaper notice as best he can while his brother slumps in the wing-back chair. On the table between them rests a rose marble chessboard, frozen in play. Raindrops wriggle down the window pane. It is a mild June in 1910 and their 7th day in London without a single challenge. Their tour manager, Mr. Benjamin, lured them here from Lahore, promising furious bouts under calcium lights, their names in every newspaper that matters. But the very champions who used to thump their chests and flex their backs for photos are now staying indoors, as if they have ironing to do. Not a word from Benjamin Doc Roller or Strangler Lewis, not from the Swede John Lem or the whole fleet of Japanese fresh from Tokyo. Every year in London, a world champion is crowned anew, one white man after the next, none of whom have wrestled a Pehlwan. They know nothing of Handsome Hassan or Kallu or the giant Kikkar Singh, who once uprooted an acacia tree bare-handed just because it was disrupting the view from his window. Gama has defeated them all and more. But how is he to be champion of the world if this half of the world is in hiding? Mr. Benjamin went to great trouble to arrange the trip. He cozied up to the Mishra family and got the Bengali millionaires to finance the cause, printed up press releases, and rented them a small, gray-shingled house removed from the thick of the city, with space enough out back to carry on their training. The house is fairly comfortable, if crowded with tables, standing lamps, settees, and armchairs. When it rains, they push the furniture to the walls and conduct their routines in the center of the sitting room. Other adjustments are not so easy. Gama keeps tumbling out of bed 4 hours late, his mustache squashed on one side. Imam climbs upon the toilet bowl each morning, his feet on the rim, and engages in a bout with his bowels. Afterwards, he inspects the results. If they are coiled like a snake ready to strike, his guru used to say, all is in good shape. There are no snakes in London. These days, when Mr. Benjamin stops by, he has little more to offer than an elaborate salam and any issues of sporting life and health and strength in which they have been mentioned, however briefly. He is baby-faced and bald, normally jovial, but Imam senses something remote about him, withheld, as though the face he gives them is only one of many. You and your theories, Gama says. Left to themselves, Gama and Imam continue to hibernate in the melancholy house. They run 3 kilometers up and down the road, occasionally coughing in the fume and grumble of a motor car. They wrestle. They do hundreds of baituks and duns, lost in the calm that comes of repetition. And at the end of the day, they rest. They bathe. They smooth their skin with dry mustard, which conjures homeward thoughts of plains ablaze with yellow blooms. Sometimes, reluctantly, they play another game of chess. On the 8th morning, Mr. Benjamin pays a visit. For the first time in their acquaintance, he looks agitated and fidgets with his hat. His handshake is damp. He follows the wrestlers into the sitting room, carrying with him the stink of a recently smoked cigar. The cook brings milky yogurt and ghee for the wrestlers, tea for Mr. Benjamin. Gama and Imam brought their own cook from Lahore, old Ahmed, who is deaf in one ear but knows every nuance of the Pehlwan diet. They were warned about English food, mushy potatoes, dense pies, gloomy puddings, the sort of fare that would render them leaden in body and mind. When Mr. Benjamin has run out of small talk, he empties a sober sigh into his cup. Right. Well, I suppose you're wondering about the tour. Yes, quite, Imam says, unsure of his words but too anxious to care. It seems a bad sign when Mr. Benjamin sets his cup and saucer aside. Wrestling in England, Mr. Benjamin explains, has become something of a business. Wrestlers are paid to take a fall once in a while, to pounce and pound and growl on cue, unbeknownst to the audience, which nevertheless seems to enjoy the drama. After the match, the wrestlers and their managers split the money. Occasionally these hoaxes are discovered to great public outcry, the most recent being the face-off between Yusuf the Terrible Turk and Stanislaus Zabisco. After Zabisco's calculated win, it was revealed that Yusuf the Terrible was actually a Bulgarian named Ivan with debts to pay off. And you know of this now only? Imam asks. No, well, not entirely. Mr. Benjamin pulls on a finger, absently cracks his knuckle. I thought I could bring you fellows and turn things around, show everyone what the sport bloody well should be. Imam glances at Gama, who is leaning forward, gazing at Mr. Benjamin's miserable face with empathy. There would be challengers, Mr. Benjamin shrugs, if only you would agree to take a fall here and there. After receiving these words from Imam, Gama pulls back, as if bitten. Fall how? Gama says. On purpose, Imam explains quietly. Gama's mouth becomes small and solemn. Imam tells Mr. Benjamin that they will have to decline the offer. But you came all this way. Mr. Benjamin gives a flaccid laugh. Why go back with empty pockets? For emphasis, Mr. Benjamin pulls his own lint-ridden pockets inside out and nods at Gama with the sort of encouragement one might show a thick-headed child. Gama asks Imam why Mr. Benjamin is exposing the lining of his pants. The lunget we wear, it does not have pockets, Imam tells Mr. Benjamin, hoping the man might appreciate the poetry of his refusal. Mr. Benjamin blinks at him and explains, in even slower English, what he means by empty pockets. So this is London, Imam thinks, nodding at Mr. Benjamin, a city where athletes are actors, where the ring is a stage. Thanks.
Death of a cousin is $500. Death of a sibling is $12.50. Parents are $2,000 apiece. But depending on the situation, people will pay all kinds of money for all kinds of reasons, for bad reasons, for no reason at all. The company started off in run-of-the-mill corporate services, basic stuff, ethical qualm transference, plausible deniability, the sort of things that generated good cash flow that was fed right back into R&D. Year after year, turning the little shop into a bit player, and then a not-so-bit player, and then eventually into a leader in a specialized market. In those early days, this place was known as Conscience Incorporated. The company had cornered the early market in gilt. Then the technology improved. Some genius in Delhi had figured out a transfer protocol to standardize and packetize all different kinds of experiences. Overnight, everything changed. An industry was born, the business of bad feeling. For the right price, almost any part of life could be avoided. Across the street from work is a lunch place I go to sometimes. Not much, really. A hot and crowded little room, a bunch of stools in front of a greasy counter. I come here mostly for the small television up on a shelf above the cash register. They have a satellite feed. Today, they have it switched to American television, and I'm watching a commercial for our company's services. It shows a rich, executive-looking type sitting and rubbing his temples, making the universal television face for I am an executive in a highly stressful situation. There are wavy lines on either side of his temples to indicate that the executive is really stressed. Then he places a call to his broker, and in the next scene, the executive is lying on a beach, drinking golden beer from a bottle and looking at the bluest ocean I have ever seen. Next to me is a woman and her daughter. The girl, maybe 4 or 5, is scooping rice and peas into her mouth, a little at a time. She is watching the commercial in silence. When she sees the water, she turns to her mother and asks her softly what the blue liquid is. I am thinking about how sad it is that she's never seen water that color in real life, until I realize that I'm 39 years old and hey, you know what? Neither have I. And then the commercial ends with one of our slogans. Don't feel like having a bad day? Let someone else have it for you. When I get to work the next morning, there's a woman sitting in the cubicle across from mine. She's young, at least a couple of years younger than me, looks right out of school. She has the new employee setup kit laid out in front of her and is reading the trainee handbook. I think about saying hi, but who am I kidding? I'm still me, so instead I just say nothing. My first ticket of the day is a deathbed. Deathbeds are not so common. They are hard to schedule. We require at least 24 hours advance booking, and usually clients don't know far enough in advance when the ailing loved one is going to go. But this isn't regular deathbed. It's pull the plug. They're pulling the plug on Grandpa this morning. I open the ticket. I'm holding Grandpa's hand. I cry. He squeezes my hand. One last burst of strength. It hurts. Then his hand goes limp. I cry, and also I really cry, meaning not just as my client, but I start crying too. Sometimes it happens. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because he was somebody's grandpa. And he looked like a nice one, a nice man. Maybe something about the way his arm fell against the guardrail on the hospital bed. Nothing dramatic or poignant, just a part of his body going thunk against metal. Maybe because I could sort of tell when Grandpa was looking at his grandson for the last time, looking into his eyes, looking around in there trying to find them. He didn't find him. He just found me instead. And he knew what had happened, and he didn't even look mad, just hurt. It used to be that the job wasn't all pain. Rich American man outsources the nasty bits of his life. He's required to book by the hour or the day or some other time unit, but in almost any crappy day there are always going to be some parts of it that aren't so bad. Maybe just boring. Maybe even more okay than not. Like if a guy books his colonoscopy and he hires us for 2 hours, but for the first 8 minutes he's just sitting there in the waiting room reading a magazine, enjoying the air conditioning, admiring someone's legs, or something. Anyway, it used to be that we would get the whole thing, so part of my job here could be boring or neutral or even sometimes kind of interesting. But then the technology improved again, and the packaging software was refined to filter out those intervals and collect them. Those bits, those extras, the leftover slices of life that were lopped off by the algorithm and smushed all together in a kind of reconstituted life slab, a life loaf. Lunch meat made out of bits of boredom. So they take the slabs and they process them and sell them as prepackaged lives. I've had my eye on one for a while at a secondhand shop that's on my way home. It's not ideal, but it's something to work for. So now, what's left over is pretty much just pure, undiluted badness. The only thing left to look forward to is when, once in a while, in the middle of an awful day, there is something not so awful mixed in there. Like the relief in the middle of a funeral. Or sometimes when you get someone who is really religious. Not just religious, but a person of true faith. Then mixed in with the sadness and the loss, you get something extra. You get to try different flavors depending on the believer. You get the big foot on your chest, or you get the back of your head on fire, a cold fire. It tickles. You get to know what it's like to know that your dead lover, your dead mother, father, brother, sister, that they're all standing in front of you, tall as the universe, and they have huge infinite feet, and their heads are all ablaze with this brilliant frozen fire. You get the feeling of being inside of a room, and at the same time the room being inside of you, and the room is the world, and so are you. Thank you.
Watch this and other Brooklyn Independent Television episodes online at bricartsmedia.org/BIT.